Good morning. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here today and to participate in this very important conference. I want to express my thanks to His Eminence, Cardinal Riss, for this invitation and for his hospitality. I had the opportunity to meet His Eminence this past summer when he graciously welcomed representatives of the International Council of Christians and Jews from around the world to a gathering we held in Warsaw. It's also a pleasure to share this session with His Excellency Bishop Tymieniecki, whom I've come to know through my work with the Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews and with the Pontifical Gregorian University's Bea Center for Judaic Studies, of which he is a former director and where I had the privilege of teaching. And finally, I want to acknowledge the presence of my very good friend and colleague, Sister Dr. Kasia Kowalska of the Congregation of Our Lady of Zion, co-chair of the Polish Council of Christians and Jews, and first vice president of the ICCJ. With Nostra Aetate, the Roman Catholic Church made a profound contribution to the development of interreligious relations in the post-war era. While I will focus my remarks on the fourth chapter, which addresses Jews and Judaism, it should be noted that in the first three chapters, the Church affirms the unity of humanity and sees in different religions a common quest to understand what it refers to as the divine mystery. It explicitly refers to Buddhism and Hinduism, and while acknowledging profound differences, it, quote, rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. It speaks of esteem for Muslims, and in its fifth and final chapter, it categorically rejects any theory or practice that leads to discrimination. Regarding the council, I get ahead of myself with these things, excuse me. Regarding the council, Pope John the 23rd was reported to have said something about throwing open the windows of the church. With Nostra Aetate, especially when read in the light of other conciliar documents such as Dignitatis Humanae, the windows of interreligious relations were open wide. And in the intervening years, it has become an integral part of the life of the church. Indeed, the church now plays a primary role in convening international religious leadership to address shared concerns, such as Pope John Paul II's Day of Prayer for World Peace in Assisi in 1986, or the Document on Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together, jointly signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayyib. And of course, there is an entire department in the Vatican committed to this work, the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. On the one hand, the dialogue between the Church and the Jews should be seen within the broader context of the Church's post-conciliar commitment to interreligious dialogue. Many Jews and Catholics would argue, however, that the relationship between the Church and the Jews is unique. Indeed, one of the debates at the Council was whether a statement on the Jews should be a separate document or part of a broader treatment of interreligious relations. The latter prevailed for a variety of reasons, but that special relationship is still apparent in the text of Nostra Aetate, and it continues to define the Church's relationship with the Jews. I also note here that the Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews is not part of the Dicastery for Interreligious Relations, but rather is housed within the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity. I'm going to return to that a little bit later. To begin with, Nostra Aetate's chapter on the Jews is much longer than any of the other chapters, and it addresses Judaism differently than the other traditions cited. It speaks of the spiritual bond and patrimony that Jews and Christians share, and recognizes that the church's roots are in the Old Testament and in the Jewish people. Oh. Yes, easier to read, but not easier to read. Just one moment here. Okay. In renouncing both the charge of deicide, that the Jews are not responsible for the death of Jesus, and the notion that as a result God has rejected the Jews, Nostra Aetate repudiates the two concepts that lie of the heart of what Jules Isaac called the teaching of contempt for Jews and Judaism. This break with centuries of tradition is one of the defining features of Nostra Aetate chapter 4. It also seems to acknowledge, at least implicitly, the connection between Christian anti-Judaism and Western anti-Semitism, which led ultimately to the Nazi final solution. This is also implicit in the statement that the church, quote, decries hatred and persecutions, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time by anyone. While other Christian groups had previously made similar statements, the prominence of the Roman Catholic Church, along with the attention focused on the council, helped Nostra Aetate become emblematic of the revolution in post-war Jewish-Christian, not just Jewish-Catholic, relations. Like most revolutions, the transformation of Jewish-Catholic relations initiated by Nostra Aetate is an ongoing process. Chapter 4 may be the longest, but at only around 600 words, it cannot possibly delve into the complex ideas. Some of the most important topics in Jewish-Catholic relations are not mentioned at all or are referenced only obliquely. In what some consider a glaring omission, Nostra Aetate assiduously avoids mentioning the state of Israel or the return of Jewish people to sovereignty. And lest anyone suggest otherwise, the document insists that the declaration is not moved by political reasons, nor does it explicitly mention the Holocaust, though, as I noted, its stance on anti-Semitism is unequivocal. Perhaps the most challenging and complex statement in Nostra Aetate is the insistence that God, quote, does not repent the gifts he makes or the calls he issues. This raises profound questions touching on core teachings of the church, such as covenant, salvation, and mission, topics beyond the scope of the declaration. Along with its theological and historical aspects, the other key component of Nostra Aetate is its endorsement of joint biblical and theological studies, as well as fraternal dialogues. The revolution that Nostra Aetate initiated has left an enduring mark on the church. Many of the topics not dealt with in Nostra Aetate were taken up and developed in subsequent documents that the ambassador mentioned, beginning with guidelines for the suggestions and implementing the conciliar document Nostra Aetate number 4 in 1974, the notes on the correct way to present Jews and Judaism in preaching and catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church from 1985. We remember a reflection on the Shoah, 1994. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable from 2015. And I also note the 2002 document of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, The Jewish People and Their Sacred Scripture in the Christian Bible. The Holy See and Israel established formal diplomatic relations in 1993. Papal visits to Israel, to synagogues, to the synagogue in Rome in particular, but to other synagogues and elsewhere, and to Auschwitz, communicate powerful nonverbal messages. Nostra Aetate has also affected the church on the local level, from national to the parish level, primarily in places where there are also Jewish communities. One can see the effect of Nostra Aetate in an array of interfaith activities. For example, this conference here today. There is now a vast and growing body of writings on Jews and Judaism and Jewish Catholic relations from popes and other Vatican officials, from bishops' conferences, from Catholic scholars and theologians. And in the spirit of Nostra Aetate, collaboration and exchange between Jewish and Catholic scholars is simply the way things are now. Building a relationship, however, especially after centuries of distrust, is a delicate process. Initial Jewish reaction to the promulgation of Nostra Aetate was generally positive, though the omissions and unanswered questions I mentioned were also noted at the time. Furthermore, some of the language assumed a posture of superiority. The phrase, "True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed the lead pressed for the death of Jesus," is based on outdated biblical scholarship. The phrase, "Although the church is the new people of God," certainly suggests replacement. Jews also recognize that, as momentous as this was, Nostra Aetate was merely the first step, and it remained to be seen how and to what extent it would affect the entire Roman Catholic world. Now, let me illustrate this dramatic change, and I think it has been dramatic, with a little family history. My grandfather escaped the pogroms in Tsarist Russia and settled in the United States. As a child, my father and his friends would avoid walking by the local Catholic school on their way home from their school for fear that they would be beaten up. My father, Samuel Sandmel, became a rabbi and eventually a professor of Bible and Hellenistic literature. The latter was a term for that included the New Testament, at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio, then the flagship seminary of the Reformed Jewish movement. He was also a pioneer in post-World War II Jewish-Christian dialogue. By 1965, my father had published well-received, dare I say, groundbreaking books on Philo, the New Testament, and Paul, and was a sought-after lecturer at Protestant churches and seminaries. While he had some limited contact with Catholic scholars, the release of Nostra Aetate changed everything. My father said that before Nostra Aetate, he had never been invited to a Catholic institution. After its release, he said, it was as if the floodgates had opened. And he was immediately in great demand in Catholic institutions as well. Now, this is in some ways a telling comment about American Catholicism in the 1960s and its openness to the changes heralded by the Second Vatican Council. And the influence of the American Church on that council has been well documented. Now, I was 9 years old when Nostra Aetate was promulgated, and it had a profound effect on my family and me. Being around Roman Catholics, especially priests and nuns, was simply part of my childhood. It is only in retrospect that I have come to appreciate that what I witnessed, and that to an extent participated in, was a transformative time in Jewish Catholic and Jewish Christian relations. While Protestant ministers and scholars had long been fixtures at our Sabbath and Passover meals, Now priests and nuns, often in collars and habits, suddenly appeared, and it seemed became regular guests. I remember that for several years, my mother, Frances Fox Sandmel, who had in 1959 published a children's novel about Jewish-Christian relations, put on a model Seder for the sisters at a convent in our neighborhood, and I tagged along to chant the 4 questions. I have vivid memories of those Sidarim to this day, and the attention showered on me by the sisters, who apparently thought I was adorable. Now, while this may not seem extraordinary today, in its time, it was new and fresh and revolutionary. As a child just beginning to understand religious difference, I was unaware of its novelty, or that I was participating in something that just a few decades ago would have been inconceivable. Once when my grandfather came to visit us, my father asked him if he wanted to see a production of Tevye and His Daughters. This is a collection of short stories by the great Yiddish author Sholem Aleichem that was eventually turned into the 1964 musical Fiddler on the Roof. My grandfather was a great fan of Sholem Aleichem, and he was enthusiastic to go see the performance. What my father neglected to tell him was that the play was being produced at a small Roman Catholic women's college, renowned for its drama program. When my father and grandfather arrived at the theater, my grandfather looked around the foyer and saw all these men in collars and women in habit. And I say that looking out at this room. And he became afraid. He associated Christian clergy with the pogroms that had driven him from Tsarist Russia, and said to my father, "Why did you bring me here? Let's leave." At that moment, however, a number of those priests and nuns came and surrounded my father and my grandfather and greeted them warmly. My grandfather eventually relaxed, and in the end, he enjoyed the performance immensely. Now, my experience has been very different than that of my father or my grandfather. Christians, especially in clerical garb, terrified my grandfather. My father, who as a child avoided the local Catholic school, came to be close friends with priests and nuns and Catholic scholars, and received honorary degrees from 2 Catholic universities. As a scholar and theologian, he explored hitherto uncharted territory. Now, by the time I attended rabbinic school, it was a given that one of the tasks of a rabbi was to represent the Jewish community to the Christian world and to seek out relations with Christian counterparts in the communities where we would serve. At the seminary, I learned the New Testament from one of my father's students. When I began my doctoral program in Judaism and Christianity in the Greco-Roman world, a rabbi studying Christianity was no longer unique. Indeed, there were 2 other rabbis in the program with me. Now, for 11 years, I was on the faculty of the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, where I had a chair in Jewish studies co-funded by a Jew and a Catholic. CTU, the largest Catholic graduate seminary in the States, was founded in 1968 in the spirit of Nostra Aetate, and it has infused that seminary since the very beginning. Father John Pawlikowski, a leading scholar and advocate of Jewish-Christian relations, has been on the faculty since its founding. And I should add, that's on the picture, that Pope Leo received his Master of Divinity at CTU, though before my time. I've also had the honor to represent major organizations in the Jewish community in the official dialogue with international Christian bodies, As a result, I've had the opportunity to visit the Vatican often. Yes, I have my pictures with Pope Francis. And I share this personal history with you to demonstrate how over the course of 3 generations, the landscape changed so rapidly. My grandfather was afraid of Christians. My father knew a time when Catholics and Jews did not interact. He bridged the pre- and post-conciliar eras and was in the vanguard of the new world that Nostra Aetate ushered in. By the time I started my career, a Jewish scholar teaching in a Catholic seminary or a rabbi meeting with the Pope was not unusual. Indeed, some of my Catholic friends complain that it is easier for Jews to get an audience with the Pope than it is for Catholics. The experience of my family is clearly unusual, but it is nonetheless representative of the wider Jewish community's experience of the post-Nostra Aetate Church. The relationship of the Roman Catholic Church today with the Jews, and indeed with other religious traditions, all emerging from Nostra Aetate, is remarkable. Now, part of the response to Nostra Aetate from the Jewish community was eventually the publication of a number of statements about the Jewish relationship with Christians and Christianity. The first of these was Dabru Emet, a Jewish statement on Christians and Christianity from September of 2000. It was and remains unique. It is the only international document, written and endorsed by Jews representing a broad spectrum of the Jewish community. It was endorsed by Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, and Orthodox rabbis and scholars. And it's the first to address the changes in Christianity initiated by Nostra Aetate. Indeed, it has been called the Jewish Nostra Aetate, an understandable, if not entirely apt, application. Like Nostra Aetate, Dabru Emet grabbed the attention of the Jewish and Christian world. The crucial difference between the two is that Nostra Aetate is an authoritative document of the Church, while Dabru Emet has no institutional authority. The document itself makes clear. It represents only the opinion of its authors and those who endorsed it. Yet in public perception, the two of them are seen as complementary, the Jewish and Christian statements of the new age of dialogue and relationship. Now, following Dabru Emet, between 2011 and 2017, 4 other major Jewish statements have been published. 3 come from Orthodox Jewish circles, and 1 from the Jewish community in France. All are predicated on the belief that Christian teachings about Jews and Judaism have changed for the better, as represented by both Protestant and Catholic official statements and documents. All contend that these changes prove that Jews can and should approach Christians and Christianity without the trepidation of the past. All explicitly or implicitly draw on rabbinic traditions going back to the Middle Ages and assign Christianity a role in the final redemption. Several of them affirm that Christians are not idolaters and that they worship the same God as the Jews. Christians and Jews share certain texts, beliefs, and moral values, though there are irreconcilable differences that define each community's uniqueness. All of these statements believe that dialogue and cooperation are not only possible, but necessary. Now, these Jewish statements are brief, at most a few pages. And so, as with Nostra Aetate, this brevity precludes depth and nuance. In that way, they invite further study. For that reason, the authors of Dabru Emet insisted that their statement be accompanied by 2 books, one scholarly and one aimed at lay audiences. The entrance of Orthodox Jewish authorities into the arena in the last few years, therefore, is particularly significant. The Orthodox community was more hesitant than liberal Jews to embrace the changes in the Christian world and to engage in dialogue. It is the nature of conservative communities to move slowly. This is, I think, true of the church as well. The fact that Orthodox Jews are now participating to the point of issuing international statements demonstrates that the changes in the Christian world heralded by Dabru Emet are now broadly accepted by the Jewish religious community. Of course, it has not always been easy. In the first place, Nostra Aetate challenged Christians to teach and preach about Jews and Judaism differently than they had for almost 2 millennia. The guidelines on the implementation of the conciliar declaration Nostra Aetate and notes on the correct way to present Jews and Judaism in preaching and catechesis go into detail about how this should be realized in the daily life of the church. Unfortunately, these teachings are still not well known in the church. As Dr. Mary Boyce has written, quote, "While many Catholics and Christians more generally are at least vaguely aware that the church has generally improved its relations with the Jews and other religions, few people, clergy included, seem to be aware of the continuing theological bond invigorated at Vatican II that has evolved in significant ways." She continues, "My concern is not so much that people have at best a vague notion of what Nostra Aetate says, but rather that its insights seem to play no role in the ordinary life of the church, especially its liturgical life in preaching. It is rare that a homilist builds upon its insights, even implicitly. This omission is particularly evident when the lectionary delivers a text, especially during the Lenten and Easter seasons, for which Nostra Aetate's theological perspectives are critical. Reading of Passion accounts on Passion or Palm Sunday and on Good Friday typically continue without mention of the Church's recognition that the Jewish people are not responsible for the death of Jesus." Sister Boyce concludes, "Overall, many Christians look upon Judaism as obsolete, its covenant seen as preparing for and fulfilled in the salvific work of Jesus Christ. Jesus is frequently portrayed in stark contrast to his Jewish counterparts. This rich the rich literature of biblical scholarship on the many troubling texts in which Jews are depicted negatively seem to play little role in preaching. Indeed, I regularly hear from Catholic friends about homilies that continue to paint the Jews as a deicide people and perpetuate other anti-Semitic canards. This raises very serious questions about Catholic education, including both the formation of priests and deacons and the curricula of schools. To state the obvious, unless the documents are taught, the old teachings will live on. Realistically, however, with everything vying for the attention of Catholics and for the Church, including seminary rectors and school principals, recognizing the importance of Jewish-Catholic relations and then making it a priority requires strong institutional leadership. Indeed, evidence that the teachings of Nostra Aetate have not become integrated into the Church can be seen in the contradiction between Pope Francis's genuine commitment to Jewish-Catholic relations and his friendship for the Jewish people, and then his use from time to time of outdated anti-Semitic tropes. The same Pope who blessed a conference focused on the history of the Pharisees and on correcting the harmful mischaracterizations of them, on several occasions made unfortunate references to the Pharisees. Now, Pope Francis was unquestionably a friend of the Jewish people. That he could rely on these anti-Semitic tropes shows how deeply embedded these ideas are in the church and how difficult it is to remove them from the rhetorical toolbox. It also demonstrates that rejecting anti-Semitism is an essential first step. Learning how to recognize it in order to avoid it is a much harder job. Now, there are other obstacles to overcome. I referred to the 1974 guidelines that Jewish-Christian relations are important even where there are no Jewish communities. As the church's center of gravity shifts to the global south, Catholics, and other Christians for that matter, will only encounter Jews through their reading of the Bible or through their theological studies. What will be the motivation to learn about Catholic teachings on Jews and Judaism? Changing views of the Holocaust are also a factor. As the Holocaust fades from living memory and other atrocities and genocides occur, its impact understandably diminishes. The perception of Jews as victims that prevailed in the immediate aftermath of the Shoah has been affected by the emergence of Israel as a military power and by the political influence of the American Jewish community and a few other Jewish communities in particular, though both perceptions are often distorted and exaggerated by classic anti-Semitic tropes of Jewish global power. Furthermore, the Holocaust occurred in Europe. For non-Westerners, especially those colonized by many of those same Europeans, the sense of guilt that has been such a factor driving Jewish Christian rapprochement is often seen as irrelevant. The Holocaust and indeed anti-Semitism are perceived as European rather than Christian problems. Making the case for the relevance of Jewish-Christian relations requires a different approach. Now, one possible avenue is the causal relationship between anti-Judaism and replacement theology on the one hand, and Christian complicity in racism and colonialism on the other, as seen in the work of Magda Teeter and Willie James Jennings. Another challenge is whether the church will continue to see relations with the Jews as a priority. After all, Jews are a tiny minority of the world's population. The other traditions mentioned in Nostra Aetate, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, account for about half of the population of the world. We Jews are less than 0.25%. Maintaining a focus on Jewish-Catholic relations will require an effort. As Cardinal Cassidy, the former prefect of the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity, pointed out in a lecture in 2001. He said, "Let us turn then to consider the future. Our first aim must be, of course, to press forward. To stand still is to risk going backwards. And I feel absolutely confident in stating that there will be no going back on the part of the Catholic Church. At the same time, there can be a lessening of enthusiasm, a growing indifference, or even a renewed spirit of suspicion and mistrust among the members of the Catholic community should our efforts to keep up the momentum slacken." I noted earlier that Nostra Aetate does not mention Israel, but that diplomatic relations were eventually established and that there have been several papal visits. Relations with the State of Israel are the domain of the Secretariat of State, not the Commission for the Religious Relations with the Jews. Over the past 2 years, there has been criticism of the policies of the government of Israel that representatives of Israel and others in the Jewish community have deemed unfair and in some cases anti-Semitic. Suffice it to say that this is a fraught issue and there are different opinions within each community. Regarding the connection between the Jews, the land, and the state, the 1985 guidelines put forward a somewhat ambiguous position. It said, Christians are invited to understand this religious attachment, which it finds its roots in biblical tradition, without, however, making their own any particular religious interpretation of this relationship. The existence of the State of Israel and its political options should be envisioned not in a perspective which is itself religious, but in their reference to the common principles of international law. This statement, however, speaks only of a religious attachment that Jews might have to the land. It does not acknowledge the existential significance most Jews attribute to the existence of the state, or to the familial bond and historical trauma that unites diaspora and Israeli Jews. Now, this does not mean that Catholics should refrain from criticizing the policies of the State of Israel, but greater awareness to these sensitivities might help when expressing legitimate concerns, especially when citing Scripture. It would also help if Jews had a better appreciation for the Christian communities in the region and the challenges they face. There has been a dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents and rhetoric over the last few decades. The Israel-Hamas war merely exacerbated that trend. Anger over the actions of the government of Israel often serve as a pretext for attacking Jews and Jewish institutions. Following the Holocaust, there was a period in which being publicly anti-Semitic was, with some exceptions, out of favor. Some of that repressed hatred was directed to the State of Israel. But explicit anti-Semitism is increasingly socially acceptable. In a world of ideological polarization and extremism, Jews are targeted from both the left and the right. All of this is being amplified exponentially by social media and artificial intelligence. There is great fear in the Jewish community today. I feel it. In this environment, the Church's voice in condemning anti-Semitism continues to be crucial. Like his predecessors, Pope Leo has condemned anti-Semitism and pledged, quote, to continue and strengthen the Church's dialogue and cooperation with the Jewish people in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council's declaration, Nostra Aetate. This is a good beginning. I want to conclude with some thoughts about the placing of the Commission for Religious Relations for the Jews within the Secretariat, or now Dicastery, for promoting Christian unity. On its website, the Commission seems to have one name in English and another in French and Italian. In English on the website, it's called the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. And to our interpreters, I'm going to go off script for just a moment, so forgive me. But if you look at this slide, it says at the bottom, Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. But if you look at the toolbar all the way on your right, it says Religious Relations with Judaism. From my perspective, however, there's a big difference between the Catholic relationship with Jews and its relationship with Judaism. This is explicit in the 1974 guidelines, which states, the problem of Jewish-Christian relations concerns the state, which concerns the church as such, since it is when pondering her own mystery that she encounters the mystery of Israel. Therefore, even in areas where no Jewish communities exist, this remains an important problem. It seems then that the church's relations to Judaism is in some way independent or disconnected from its relationship to Jews. Or perhaps another way to put it is that the church has its own notion of Judaism that may be similar to those held by Jews, but may not be identical, especially since Jews don't all agree on what Judaism is. Now, the fact that the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, or Judaism, is housed in the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity strikes some Jews as odd. Some immediately think it has a missionary intent, but of course the church has been clear that it does not engage in targeted mission to the Jews, as stated in Gifts and Calling. That the Jews participate in God's salvation is theologically unquestionable. But how that can be possible without confessing Christ explicitly is and remains an unfathomable mystery. The placement within Christian unity does suggest that Jews and Judaism have significance for the church's quest for Christian unity. That is not the case with other religious communities. For Nostra Aetate, the church's bond with the Jews, the stock of Abraham, is deemed central to its quest to understand itself, to search its own mystery. And as Pope St. John Paul II famously said, the Jewish religion is not extrinsic to us, but in a certain way it is intrinsic to our own religion. With Judaism, therefore, we have a relationship we do not have with any other religion. There's something profound about the idea that my tradition and my people, and maybe even myself in my Jewish specificity, have theological significance for the church and for other Christians. Despite the tragedy of the past and the challenges of the present, there is a bond between Catholics and Jews. This is something worth celebrating and strengthening by continuing to realize the promise of Nostra Aetate. Thank you.